Cool. Okay, I've started that then. So there's not a lot of us, but Mark, do you want to just do a bit of housekeeping for us?
Yeah, hi there. So we just started recording. I suppose there's only a few of us, so just if you're not speaking, just to be mindful of muting your microphone. If you need to chat, ask a question, you can use the chat facility or raise your hand. I think that's on the housekeeping. So let's enjoy this excellent webinar. Thank you.
Cheers, Mark. Cheers. Cool. So what I'm going to do to start with, I've just got a little poll here just to get a sense of what level people are at. Your channel crossing experience. So I'm just trying to do this on my phone. There we go. So there's a little poll just been launched there, if you want to have a little look at that. So there's 4 options. So whether you'd like to cross the channel as crew or a skipper, or that you have crewed or you have skippered. Cool. So okay, so we've got people wanting to skipper across, and a couple of people have crewed or skippered across the channel. Cool. Okay, so I'll just end that for now. There we go. Cool, that's useful. So this isn't going to be completely exhaustive. I'm not intending this as this now gives you your passage plan to go across. Just kind of sharing some sort of experiences and giving you a bit of an overview. This is kind of an hour really. Got a few more people just coming in there. Oops. Sorry, phone keeps falling off. I would say one of the core things you need to sort of consider is some navigational theory, basically, before we even think about the boats and various other aspects. There are some different things involved in crossing the channel than just kind of coastal navigation. So those of you who sail sort of around the Solent will be pretty used to the idea that like tide is a major factor we need to consider, and we can rarely go exactly where we're pointing. The tide has quite an influence on us. So what one of the things we need to think about, and a slightly different strategy for crossing the channel, is our tides. So when we make up a course to steer, and this is the sort of thing we cover in the day skipper theory course. You're drawing a line from A to B. This is where I want to go to. You're thinking of the tide. So how much is the tide going to, if I want to go this way, the tide's cutting across me that way, then I need to steer the boat that way. That's the basics of drawing up a course to steer. So we might not be pointing the boat exactly in the direction that we're going. So one of the things we need to think about that's slightly different for crossing the channel, if we think that we're going from, say, the Needles at the western end of the Solent across to Cherbourg, it's just north to south. It's about 60 miles. If we think of a cruising speed of 5 knots, it's 12 hours. Yeah. So in theory, we've got 6 hours of east going tide, 6 hours of west going tide. Doesn't it just cancel itself out? So we just point the boat in the direction we want to go. That is potentially might work out, but not always the case. So when we're going along a short crossing across the tide, like say like 6 miles across a bit of the Solent, we would just work out a course to steer for an hour's worth of tide, wouldn't we? Now, when we're crossing the channel, the big thing we've got to think about is we don't want to do our course to steer every hour. What we want to work out is 12 hours worth of tide and what it all cumulatively adds up to, and that then will become our tide for our course to steer. So the way we want to work that out is using our tidal stream atlases. So have you got, can you share, Mark, a picture of one of the tidal stream atlases? There's a couple of images there, just to give an idea. Cool. So we need to zoom in quite a bit on that image, Mark. So this is just
Let me give it another one.
yeah. Oh, they both need zooming in.
Yeah, the images they lose their clarity when you zoom in.
Well, that doesn't matter too much on these
Okay.
ones, I think. Yeah, if you go for that first one and zoom it in.
Right, let me bring that up again.
So I'm gonna talk a little bit about some of the theory stuff here. I'm not gonna expect to cover this in kind of great detail given the sort of technology and stuff, but these are important things just to start with. So say we were going from the Needles to Cherbourg. It's pretty much the Needles is the west side, the left hand side of the Isle of Wight there, and it's a pretty much north-south line. And if I thought I was about 60 miles, if I'm doing 5 knots, then there's 12 hours. So I would draw a line on the tidal stream atlas between those 2 points and work out the 12ths. So say, you know, I'd have to work out how, you know, it'd be like about, I don't know, half a centimetre along for each hour. And I would have to work out then the direction and speed of the tide for each of those hours. So this picture is showing 1 hour of tide, and we'd be flicking through a tidal stream atlas for every extra hour, and we'd have to add them all up. So the small numbers, the left-hand numbers, say up at the in the middle there, it says 2035. 20 is actually 2 knots if it was neaps, comma 35, 3.5 knots if it was springs. So it's giving the neap rate and the spring rate. I'm kind of assuming that we know about neaps and springs. So if we were on neaps, we'd have an hour of east going tide at 2 knots in that middle bit of the channel. And the commas between the two, that's where the tide's actually been recorded. So the bits in between, there's not numbers everywhere. It's kind of a little bit of an art. So we need to get a rough idea of the direction and the speed of the tide for the time of neaps or springs we're on for each 12th along towards our destination. And then we need to sort of draw them all out and add them all up together and see what the cumulative tide is. And we're going to look at a real chart with plots on it in a bit. So often they do sort of equal themselves out, but not always. And as you can see on this tidal stream atlas, just for one random hour of channel tides, where can you see the stronger tides? If you have a little look, they're all on the French side. So on the south coast of the UK, our tides are a lot weaker than on the French side. So that's where you see, you know, if it was 6 hours of east going, 6 hours of west going, well, the west going on the French side is stronger. It's going to probably cumulatively be more west going tide. So we can see that we've got to take that into account. So I think you'll always find, even if you're just going Needles to Cherbourg, there's always a bit of tide more to east or more to west, and we need to take that into account. So that's one thing, we add them all up together. Okay, and then because the tides are so much stronger on the French side, we need to be really aware that whatever we're doing, we always land up tide of our destination. So there's 2 ways of doing this. We can either build in a bit of positive error, or as well as about 12 miles off our destination, we'll do a new course to steer just to make sure we land up tide. Because believe me, if you think, you know, you're 5 miles off and you think you can aim straight for the gap at Cherbourg, and then you've got to fight against the tide, it doesn't take very much tide to make that a bit of a problem, really. So there's some different sort of navigational theory things that you need to get your head around. So do you mind just taking us off the screen share there, Mark? Cool. And there's another image to share, Mark, which is of it's called channel tides, which will just emphasize a little bit about the difference between the UK side and the French side. if you're able to share that. So does anyone think about why the tides might be stronger on the French side than on the UK side? If you have a think, you've got the whole of the Atlantic water coming into the channel, and here it comes on this dramatic picture. We just see the photo there, Mark, not the thing. So you've got the whole of the Atlantic tide coming in. On the UK south coast, it's fairly level. You know, it's Cornwall and then the south coast. But on the French side, you've got Brittany sticking out. And then here we go. And you can see the Cotentin Peninsula, which is Cherbourg, sticking out. And it basically makes the tide run a lot faster. It's kind of like any tide, like a tide around any headland, it will run faster. And this little graphic, if we're able to zoom in a little bit here, shows like the hour of each, the hour as the tide moves up the coast. That kind of makes sense. So when you see it's the red lines, so like contours of the time that the tide arrives, and it's fairly equal on the UK side, but it's there's a lot more coastline along the French side. That's what I'm trying to say, really. So the tide has to run a lot faster to keep up. Yeah, so don't worry about the blue lines, but if you look at the red lines here, you look down from Cornwall up through Dorset, they're fairly equally spaced. But if you look along the Brittany side and into the Channel Islands, they do all weird shapes, those red lines. So they're not as consistent, and basically they have to run a lot faster. So that's just something to really bear in mind. Very different than going along the south coast of the UK. The other thing to think about on a rules thing as well is we'll be crossing lots of shipping, the busiest shipping lanes in the world, I think, along the channel, certainly Dover-Calais. And there are designated shipping lanes up at Dover-Calais, off the north of the Channel Islands, and at various other places like off the Scilly Isles and things. And there are rules on these. We have to cross these shipping lanes. You can stop sharing that now, Mark. We have to cross these shipping lanes at right angles. So that's, if the shipping is going in here, we have to cross at right angles, not our ground track, but we have to do this. And it might be that that takes us off our overall course. And you have to bear that in mind when you're putting your tides together. So say from the Needles to Cherbourg, we're pretty much crossing the channel fine. But if we were going from Brighton to Newhaven, we've got a bit of a shipping lane like this, but we want to cross like that, but we'll have to go here, right angles, and then across. So that's going to sort of change the overall time and the route. So we've got to obey those rules. The reason they're there, they're really busy lanes. It's kind of helpful. It concentrates all the big shipping, but a right angle gets you across it quicker. Friend Ariadne describes one of our channel crossings as like kittens crossing the M1. There's a lot of very fast 15, 20 knot cargo ships out there. If you're going out, if your passage speed on your boat is 4 knots or 5 knots, and always underestimate, don't think, oh, well, I did 6 knots last week, always underestimate a little bit. 4 knots versus 20 knots, you're going to see a lot of other shipping. If your passage speed is 7 knots, you're going to see a lot less shipping out there because you're going to cross that motorway quicker. So you need to think about that. That's a different thing. And if we sail in the Solent waters, we're used to being really close to these boats, so it shouldn't worry us too much. But it's not the 3rd or 4th or 5th one you can see on the horizon. It's the one you can't see yet that will be the issue. So if we can remember how we know if we're going to have a collision with another object, another boat or a buoy, what do? We line it up with say something like a post on our boat, and if it stays fixed on that line, we're going to hit. Or we take a bearing, which can be a hand bearing compass, like this, and we can take a bearing on that object, and if it stays fixed, we're going to hit. If it's getting higher or lower, it's going to pass, depending which way we're looking, behind or ahead of us. And a really good thing with that for channel crossings, these hand-bearing compasses are quite good, a bit hard when the boat's moving. Binoculars with a compass in are really, really good because you can fix it. And when a ship is 150 meters long, you want to take the bearing on the front or the back. You don't want to, you know, that will change it a little bit. So having those tools ready is all useful. So that's some of the theory type stuff. But what I thought would be more interesting is just sort of the overview, because there's plenty of that in the book. You sort of read all of that stuff, really. So I'm just going to pop another poll up briefly, and you can use this for reference later. And this is my way of just trying to cover, say, about 10 points I thought might be useful. So come here, poll. So I'm asking here, which of these choices would not be a good idea before you do a channel crossing? So you just want to have a little look at those for a minute and see which of those might not be such a good idea. Yeah. Any thoughts on that overall list from anyone? Are any of those striking anyone as a good idea for a channel crossing?
On mute. There's not one yet, is there?
No, they're all
they're all pretty daft ideas in some way or other. Cool. So I'm gonna end that so I can come back to the video. And what we might do is try and I'm not sure, is it possible, Mark, to cut and paste those into the chat box? I don't know. We could try and see what we can do. So using those as little pointers, really. So it's your first channel crossing. Say you're doing it with some friends and everything on your own boat, possibly. You could be, you know, could be very exciting. Don't fall into the trap of having a big session the night before you head off, basically. So I'm going to have to just close that poll a bit there, Mark. Sorry.
Okay.
I think, can people still? Yeah, I think you can go into it, Mark. So yeah, don't fall into that trap of having a big session before you go out. It's a long day. If you've not done a crossing like that before and you're the skipper, you're going to have quite a lot, enough to think about. And it might be that you've been used to, you know, a little bit of choppy weather. We don't really get anything rough in the Solent. If you're off, you know, off on the coast in the Channel, like out of Brighton or something, you'll be used to a bit of chop and everything. But just coming back to the tides, if you think about it, we've got we're going to have 6 hours of tide from one direction, 6 hours from another. What happens when we have wind against tide? It gets quite choppy. And how deep is the channel? It's actually quite shallow. So shallowish seas, wind against tide, it can really turn. So that's part of your strategy too. You might want the wind against tide stuff to happen on the UK side of the coast where the tides are weaker, and arrive on the French side with the wind and tide together, so you've got less of that chop. Because if you think 6 hours in and it gets wind against tide, spring tides, it could be quite a thing. And that's the thing about having a session the night before. You might think you can have a few beers and go sailing in the Solent, but it might affect you a bit differently across channel. So the next thing there was just about briefing the crew. You know, you want to fully involve everybody, and you want people to enjoy the trip that you're doing. So it's kind of having jobs for everybody, really. So I've already mentioned about the hand-bearing compass. So rather than waiting till you're out there and going, oh my God, there's a shipping lane. Oh my God, we need to keep a track on the bearings. Show people how it works. Get them to line up a chimney as you come through the Solent and show how it changes, and say that's what we need to be doing later, so that you're giving everybody something to do. And especially if there's a bit of queasiness, you know, it's going to take their mind off things, isn't it? And give everyone a job to their level, really, so they're sort of engaged. And try not to hold everything in your head, because if you've not done a passage like this before, it's going to feel a bit stressful, and you don't want to be, if things go a little bit different than planned, it gets a bit windier, there's a bit more shipping than you imagined, or even, you know, shock horror, it doesn't make sense at the other side with the voyage because you've never been there, you know, try and as much preparation as you can do. That's what I'm kind of saying, really. So as part of that, the next thing was about just knocking up lunch while you're halfway across. You can't prep enough on kind of food stuff, really. So like I always have a Tupperware box with loads of goodies in it. It can be up there because you don't know what's going to happen with the conditions, you know. Not uncommon for it to be grey, cold and miserable crossing the channel. So you want to keep your energy up, and you don't necessarily want to be traipsing up and down in wet gear. So highly recommend you have bits of sandwiches and soup left over at the end of the trip than have a galley full of half-made mess all up the walls, you know. That kind of preparation, really. If you think you might be susceptible to getting queasy, just take something beforehand, really. So I, the other day, actually got seasick for the first time in years, and it was just totally almost incapacitated me all day. And it was too late to take anything, just sort of powered through it, but it wasn't fun. So the next day I just took a pill. We've been doing some offshore sailing, and you just don't know. So if you don't know, maybe just take a, you know, seasickness pill beforehand might help. Cool. So what was the next question on the thing there? That was about knocking up a pilotage plan, wasn't it? Oh, you can see land on the French side. How do we get in? So again, this is all about the preparation, isn't it? So if you're used to sailing in and out of Brighton Marina, Chichester Harbour, any of this, you know, once we know our harbours, we don't really have pilotage plans, do we? If we're honest, we should hopefully have some places in as waypoints if it gets poor viz, you know, we've got backup there and stuff. But when we're going somewhere new, let's do it by the book, because you never know quite how much you're gonna have to rely on that. So I would highly recommend waypoints to the pontoon, to the anchorage, have it in all the way, every turn. And in our pilotage plans, what are the key things we have on there? It's bearings and distances. Yeah, so we know from point A to B, we're going in that direction. At the moment, that doesn't make any sense. I can't see any of it, but I'm going to steer the boat in that direction because it says that. We're accounting for a bit of tide, and we look, oh, there it is. Or in advance, someone with their binoculars with the compass in can look in the direction of the next waypoint and go, yeah, no, I can see the buoy. So we're kind of a step ahead. And there's no point going up there with scraps of paper getting blown away. Those plastic wallets that your charts come in, they're ideal to put a bit of A4 paper in, so you can kind of see it as you're going along, really. So yeah, I'd have stuff like waypointed all the way. It seems a bit like overkill, but you never quite know what it is, you know, what the conditions are going to be like. And even somewhere fairly obvious like Cherbourg, it's a huge harbour. I mean, I think Napoleonic era they built all the walls, and it's just absolutely massive, the entrance, you know, you can hardly miss it. Yet when you're in there the first time, it really doesn't make sense. You know, it's like everywhere new the first time. So anything you can do to help yourself, really. And then if that's quite clearly written, that's the sort of thing I'm just going to show you. The sort of thing you can share with your crew in your briefing. So practice what I preach. So these are piloted plans from stuff we've been doing the last few days. So you've got two different styles. You know, you've got the rolling road, what you can see on the left, what you can see on the right. I've got distances and bearings and just the various objects written on, any things like watch out for ferries or whatever. So, you know, you've got that style. Or here's more of a, like a sketch, you know, an overview of the area. Depends how your brain works visually, but have something, have a plan, you know, and have all the waypoints in your chart plotter or whatever you're using. On that, something like AIS is really useful. So do people know, is anyone not sure what AIS is? So it's like electronic radar in a sense. And so if you're trying to get, you think there's a ship of interest, you're worried about it being too close to you. Well, for a start, just remember distances that we're used to being close to big boats in the Solent, but you might want a good mile off. If you can't quite get the bearing, you're moving around, the AIS will tell you the bearing. And if that bearing's changing, you know it's moving ahead or behind of you. So that can really, really help, having AIS. Cool. So the next thing on there was a bit about kind of people having accidents and you know, I think it says something flippant like wait until someone's had an accident before who's asking anyone's got first aid on board. I kind of think, so the next webinar we're going to look more at offshore sailing and preparing for like a bit of an offshore trip. But really, if we think about it, if we were going round, I don't know, even if it's like Brighton to the Solent or the Solent to Weymouth or something, there's not a lot of places to pull in. If there are, we've got to have the tide right for them. So we're out there. If we're crossing the channel, we're fairly committed. If we're offshore, I think it's all the same sort of attitude and approach. You know, what if we have an accident? What if someone falls overboard? You know, it's having the same approach, I think. So what's your ship's rules going to be about people clipping on, about watching out for the boom? You know, I think it's all the same approach, because you don't want it to happen anywhere. But if it happens mid-channel, you've got, you know, bigger waves trying to deal with, you know, so just think about what your ship's rules are really. Totally have people clipped on, I would say, all the time out in the cockpit. You know, you want to have safety lines along the side of the boat if you haven't got them already. And we'll talk a bit more in the next webinar about some of the sort of homemade sort of safety gear you can rig up a bit more. But I'm a firm believer in not going overboard and not having accidents in the first place. And if you've ever been in the wake of one of those passing big boats in the Solent, they give off quite a bit of wash. And if that's mixed up with a bit of a confused sea, you know, having all that kind of stuff thought about in advance, and not putting the fear into everybody, but, you know, if someone's feeling a bit seasickness, that's my worst. I mean, having just had it wasn't very nice, but my worst fear for crew. Because if it's really hit you, the worst thing is you just don't think about anything else, and you're just going to lean over the side and be sick. If you're not clipped on, then that becomes someone overboard. You know, if you don't suddenly produce the bucket for someone and just go for it, it's fine, don't worry. You know, you risk people doing things like leaning over the side of the boat. So just, you know, just think, well, as skipper, what am I going to do if someone starts being queasy? What am I going to do? Not if there's an accident, but to reduce there being an accident, and having stuff stowed properly, you know, all this kind of stuff. It's really worth thinking about. And then your boat's sorted for all sorts of other conditions, you know, whether it's just popping around a headland and it's wind against tide, or a longer trip. So all these kind of offshore ways of approaching things are definitely worth taking into account, even for a channel crossing. Any questions so far? Feel free to butt in with anything at any point. So then the other one was like, you wait until you've been home a week to tell someone, oh yeah, we crossed the channel. That's just, think about shore contact, you know, and let someone know what your plan is. not someone who's gonna, you know, doesn't really get sailing is gonna be restless and stressed about it. But like, you know, what is your rough plan? Are you on AIS? Can you be tracked? So that shore contact can just look you up and think, oh well, it's just taking them a bit longer. But what, you know, what if you are late in? Is it someone who can interpret the weather and just see what's going on, or maybe like, well, they really should have been in by now, and time to call the Coast Guard? And you know, I've called the Coast Guard for friends when I've been shore contact because I hadn't heard from them. And you're never going to get any shame or blame from the Coast Guard for calling them, even if 10 minutes later you ring them up and say, I've heard from them now. So have someone as your shore contact. Let them know when you're in. Also, I've been on the other end of it as well, where people are having a great time in the bar and they've forgotten to let you know that they're in. And it's just a kind of a good backup, really. And all of this stuff under the coal regs, so collision regulations, or saving of life at sea, SOLAS, one of those things. Oh yeah, safe treks, I'll mention that in a second. Yeah, you as skipper have to have a passage plan for everything. So it doesn't have to be you know, written down meticulously, but you have to have some notes, or you have to write in your logbook, you know, a briefing given to crew or something. That's the sort of thing that will cover you. But this is what you're meant to have. So was that Paul they just mentioned about safe treks, which is the RWA? You used to be able to, I think it was CG66, you could put all your information about your boat and log it with the Coast Guard, a photo of the vessel. So if there was an issue, it would they could see everything about you. They don't now do it, but this is RWA safe treks, like an app. And Paul's asking if anyone's used it. I've never. Has anybody used safe treks? Yeah, it's not very user friendly, I don't think. So I think having our own system for shore contact really is the way to do it. Cool. So there was a question there about springs or neaps as well. So sort of flippantly said it doesn't really matter whether it's springs or neaps because the channel's really deep, isn't it? So it's not about the height of tide, but it's about how, when the tide turns, the wind against tide conditions. So what's the prevailing wind up the channel? It's like a southwesterly. Could be quite nice for you know, close reach down and a broad reach back kind of thing. But once that wind picks up, and if it's on the French side where the tides are stronger, I would go for like a, you know, a neap tide if you can for your first crossing, because it's going to be less of all those factors really. So should we just have a look at an actual, before we do any more than these questions, an actual plot? So Mark, could you share that picture with all the, there we go. So this is coming back across the channel from the French side up. So if we can zoom in on the French side of things a bit, Mark. So this chart is from the channel Admiralty chart folio. So it gives you the chart folio for the Channel Islands rather, gives you this planning chart for crossing the channel, which is quite a handy one. It's all in there together. So for working out, this is going from Omonville-la-Rouge, which is just to the west of Cherbourg. The orange line is our in A to B. That's our line from Omonville to Weymouth, where we were going for pizza and cider. The sort of bluish line is the tides. Now that is elsewhere. I'd worked out all the different tides, bit of east, bit of west, and they'd added up to a predominantly east flowing tide. Yeah. So then course to steer, I take the length from A to B and I join up from the end of the tides, and that's the green line, all the way up and trace over the orange line. That's how we do our course to steer. Nice one, thanks Mark. So you can see I've got my, to get along the orange line, put in the tides on the sort of bluish purple line, and I give myself a course to steer, which I think was about 311, something like that. So the boat's aiming a little bit further west than it needs to account for the overall east flowing tide. So that's great, we've got that. But then in reality, the actual ground track we cover isn't the orange one that you'd expect. We've got all these little purple marks. So you've got a nice pen there, Mark. Are you able to join? Yeah, brilliant. So just to the left of the black line marks done, you can see the plots by the hour that actually shows the route we took. So if we've been doing a course to steer every hour, we'd have covered an awful lot more ground than this, although this looks like a lot of ground. It was spring tides. And at one point, it looked like we were going into the Western Solent. And then you get boomeranged around, basically. And about halfway across the channel, we set off about 9 in the morning. By about 2 o'clock, I started doing plots every half hour, just to be a bit more on it. And then if we zoom in to the top half of the chart here, please, Mark. Yeah, you can see there's extra plots. And then zoom in a bit more. Yes, and can you see there's another course to steer I've knocked up there? So when I get to the last pink dot, just a little bit to the right there, at that plot, it was like the home run into Weymouth. And because we've got various dangers like what's it called, the shambles, all those shallows off Portland Bill and Portland Bill itself, I thought I'd just do a brand new course to steer, taking into account where we are now. Yeah, that's the rocks we're trying to avoid. So from the pink dot, you can see that the tide that I'd worked out, which was more west flowing then. Thank you, Mark. I just knocked up another course to steer for the last 3 miles. And then the plots continued on in. Yeah. So just, you know, that's how it might work out in reality, really. So to make that possible, I've got to have my tidal stream atlas marked out by the hour, all in advance. So I'm not trying to do that down below. And say the wind got up, I'm going to have more leeway. I might be slightly different place than I thought they would be. So it's just trying to keep on it, really, for a longer passage like that. And you can see here, this also shows the TSS, the traffic separation scheme. That's the kind of magenta shaded blocks on the left hand side of the chart. So that's routing all the channel traffic north of the Channel Islands, and then they're going to make a straight line up to Dover Calais. That's it, Mark. So that's giving us an idea of where the shipping's coming from. So the first lot of shipping will be east going. So we just set off, we're looking to our left to see who's coming at us. Then we get a brief respite in the middle, and then they start coming at us from the right. So I guess as skipper as well, it's thinking about when you can get your head down, you know, in that middle bit of the shipping lane. There's a good hour before you see anything again, time for a rest. So that's how they kind of play out in reality. So we left at 9, got in about 5 or 6. So covered a lot of ground, but quite a fast crossing. Cool. So some of the other questions we had there, one was about my motor's always been fine. It's never given me any trouble in the Solent. That's going to be all right for crossing the channel. So it's just prudent, isn't it, to do some proper engine checks before you go. And if there's anything you've been putting off, do it before you go. If everything you've done has been quite calm and sedate, and suddenly the engine's been thrown around in a bit of a rolly sea, is there going to be rubbish in the filter that's going to get mixed up, cause you problems? Are they going to be something that's never been a real problem, a slight bit of air getting in, but the boat moving around might cause more air in the system? So, you know, just don't have that as a worry. You don't want to be thinking about your engine. Will it be all right? You just don't want that. And does anybody here signed up to Sea Start? Yeah, a couple of you there. Cool. So we use them at Sailboat Project. So it's like AA for boats. Worth bearing in mind, if you're a Sea Start member, I think it's about £90 a year or something. It's not too bad. They cover the north coast of France and the Channel Islands. So if you do have a problem, call them before you get another engineer. And they're great, really. Thank you, Mark. Mark's just put the link up to see start there. Couldn't fault them. They're really good. So yes, worth bearing in mind. And then there was one about the weather. Well, that's the big one, isn't it? You'll become newly obsessed with the weather in the week running up to your crossing. Anything more than 2 or 3 days is just made up magic. But you can kind of get a sense of the systems that are coming in and whether it's going to happen. You know, if you don't like the look of it, don't force yourself. Go and do something else that weekend, you know. But don't fall victim to just choosing the best weather app you can find. Look at a couple of different ones. So we want to use, we've got our Met Office, haven't we? So we're not on a inshore forecast because that's only up to 12 nautical miles offshore. We want our sea area forecast. And on, if we're going like Solent to Cherbourg, we're going to use white, which covers that whole area. But if it's a westerly system, we might look at the Plymouth at sea area as well. Or if it's an easterly, we might look at the Dover area. And if it looks windier on either side, we might think that might come to us. It might be windier than they say, because forecasters often lie. So if it looks nice and benign, that's great. But if it looks like a 4 or 5, be prepared that it might be a 4, 6. So, you know, what is your sail plan? What is your strategy? And it's always good to reef early. I think you can always shake them out. Depends on your boat. You know, if it's a big heavy boat or it's a lighter boat. But it'd be very different putting a reef in if you've got to be up at the mast to do it in a bit of a choppy sea while trying to work out about big container ships and someone's just started being sick. You know, just you don't want to go too slow, but also you want to get across. So think about that. There's something called grid files. Do you know what people know what grid files are? So this is where we get the source information for all these. You know, like I like Windy. Windy's a really good weather app, and it's very, you know, it moves really nicely. It shows you what's going on, and it's fairly honest. But Pocket Grib is quite a good one, and you can get your little area, and it will download all the little grid files. So they show them like little wind barbs, like old school. And the thing is, Windy, you look at it before you go, and you've just got out into the channel and you think, oh, let's have a look again. And it won't load when you're not in internet connection, which is next to useless. Pocket Grib will download, and that's just one brand of grid file. And the more you zoom in, the more detail it will give you, and you can have it for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days. And I find it's really, really helpful. It also shows you precipitation. So it's not just about getting wet, although it's, you know, that's an issue. But if it's really chucking it down, that's your visibility gone as well. It's worth thinking about. So they're really good while you're out there, because you know, they can get it a bit wrong, but it's really useful just to see what's coming up, and especially if you're thinking about wind shifts and stuff like that. So if you're going to use them in your sort of home sailing territory and get the hang of them a little bit, really, is good. And then there was a final question there about, I think, something about marinas. So just worth bearing in mind, like, you know, what is it you're going to end up in, really? So if you have a boat that's hard to park in a marina because it's got a long keel and it won't maneuver easily, and you just done the channel crossing, and then you've got to get parked, and that's something you don't like doing, because I know a lot of boat owners, and that's the thing they find the most challenging. Well, why go into the marina? Why not end up in an anchorage? There's plenty of spots, whether it's Alderney or that Omenville Rouge, or round the corner in Saint-Van de la Hogue, just round east of Cherbourg. Find somewhere where at the end of the trip you just drop the anchor and it's easy, you know. Or if there's a bunch of you and you all want to get on and off, obviously like a marina, but they can be pretty expensive. We think Solent marinas are expensive, but all marinas are pricey. So just sort of bear that in mind. And if you've done something like a channel crossing and you end up in a marina, that's one thing. If you end up in your own little anchorage, it makes it even more special, really. You are getting a little bit more open to swell when you're down in the Channel Islands, so just bear that in mind. So again, windy will show you swell as well as wave height. So if you look at it and it shows there's a metre or two of swell coming in to that anchorage, that's worth knowing about. We don't really experience swell that much on our side of the channel. Once you get mid-channel, you can pick up a little bit, and that can be coming in at different heights and direction and cycles to the wind waves. So Mark's just sharing us the Indian Ocean.
Sorry, I was just windy app here showing the weather, and I was just coming in for you. But
brilliant. And on windy on the right hand side, there's all these options, and you can show in swell, waves, temperature, precipitation, and all sorts of things. So it just forewarns you a bit for what's coming up. Green is good in windy. Yellow is not to be alarmed about. Definitely be reefed, and if it's going orange or above, you might want to change your mind, really. Cool. Do you want to say, Mark, about the cruising company idea?
So just sort of floating the idea about a flotilla with sailboat project for next year, if that would be of interest.
So is that next? Is that 23?
I suppose it would be, wouldn't it, Dara?
Yeah, I mean, possibly this year. I mean,
Yeah.
we do have a crossing that we're doing early August, which is to Brittany with a group. But yeah, it was just if rather than people booking on a trip with us, if there's any people who have their own boats who'd be interested but would like the idea of doing it a bit in company, so we like to have a little briefing beforehand together and meet up in the same place, do your own thing, fine, but also might find that a bit more confidence building. Just wondered if that might be of interest.
I'd definitely find that of interest, and next year would probably be perfect for us as well. So we've been Solent really. This year want to push on a little bit further down to Poole, Weymouth. Possibly could be persuaded this year, but I think we had it in mind that maybe next year would be the year that we'd probably look at that. So and I'd love to do it as part of a group as opposed to hitting it first time on our own. So it sounds a great idea.
Yeah, I mean,
likewise.
next year was thinking as well that if people are worried about bits of their boat, there's time to kind of get things sorted and things. Sorry, other Chris.
Yeah, no, likewise. We would also be interested in that as well. Yeah. And next year is fine. If not this year, actually, later this year would also be fine.
Well, maybe there's definitely the trip in August, which is like the first. We'll be leaving Chichester Harbour. It's like the 2nd of August, I think. And
I think we would have just got back from Cornwall, I think.
Right. Well, just so people know, but we could organise something for next year, which could be like a bit of a briefing together, beforehand, and there's the option to be in a bit of VHF contact, and it's just a slightly different feel than being totally out on your own, isn't it?
Sure. Yeah.
Right, excellent. I've got some of the notes there, so that's good. Thank you.
Yeah, it sounds a good idea.
So we've covered quite a lot of stuff there. Is there any questions from all of those things? I mean, if something arises after this and you want to get in touch, a lot of you look familiar faces. You know how to find us. If you want to have a chat or ask anything. But is there any sort of questions or thoughts from some of the stuff we've said?
Yeah. Brexit has made entering France and other European countries much more complicated these days. Are you able to say anything about what the procedure is?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Chris. Thank you. So when we did a Newhaven Dieppe crossing last year, so there was one UK passport holder. So we had the customs. It was a sail cargo type thing, so they all knew about it. But the customs were there, and Becky had to walk all the way around to the ferry terminal and be stamped in, and then we had to march all the way around and get it stamped out again. So there's a couple of issues there. One is it's pain, yeah, but you've got to work out what the entry is in each area and sort of play by the rules. It can mess up your timings. So if you're thinking, like, we want to leave at 7 in the morning, well, what if you can't get the border official? And we had to wait an hour for the ferry to disgorge before we could get her stamped, and we were late leaving, and it was a real pain. Actually, we were knackered because we got in much later on the Dieppe side, Newhaven side than planned. So that's all a bit meh. You might find a friendly official or stamping out the night before. I don't know. So that's all a bit variable, isn't it, at the moment?
Do you think that system will become a bit more slick with time?
Yeah, right. I mean, in theory now, you're entering the UK from outside the UK when you come back. So in theory, you're meant to fly a yellow Q flag, quarantine flag, as you come back in. You know, all this stuff. In practice, how much authorities on our side want to deal with all of that? But yes, there is a side of it, really. But I've heard of people coming back in from outside the UK to Falmouth and been rung up by a friend who knows the harbour master saying, "Can you take that yellow flag down? We just don't want the paperwork. We know who you are." You know, but then I've also heard of people coming in doing the right thing, and then, well, this was more to do with COVID regulations, getting £1,000 fine because they didn't take a test 24 hours before arriving in the UK, even though they're in a yacht at sea. So the world of bureaucracy and the border force is its own realm. We're meant to ring up Yacht Line when we come back in. So that's yeah, and I've had different experiences. I've had one where they just go, "What's the boat?" "Yeah, great." And then I've known people who've rung it up and then had the crew separated and interviewed under caution. But this is more COVID-y times, you know. But it's all a bit new, you know. Yeah. So that could be the nice thing of going out in a flotilla. You know, we'd have to get all that ticked off and everything. But it's a bit unhelpful. I'm not quite sure what it is like going to the Channel Islands. But even if you are, you might end up in Cherbourg as a port of refuge because of the weather. Yeah. So you've got to be prepared for all those eventualities, really. So, insurance, another issue just to think about. If you go into the Channel Islands, you're not covered by the whatever the new thing of the EHIT card is, the European Health Insurance.
When you arrive, do you have to give advance warning before you arrive in France?
I don't think so.
You can just roll up.
But I don't know. You know, there's a lot of it's all a bit new, really. I mean, it shouldn't be a problem. Obviously, you know, we're trading on quite a bit of privilege, and they're going to be treated very differently than if we turned up in a dinghy the side of the channel. So I'm sure things will kind of get sorted out in some way. But my main experience when we came into Dieppe was like, this is a real pain, and might affect our like sailing plans, really. So yes, look up the Yacht Line stuff, but it is not as simple as it used to be. Let's just say.
No. Can I just
go for it? Sorry, who's that?
Oh, is that me? Sorry.
Yeah, hi Paul. Yeah, hi Paul.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. I was just saying, I don't know if anyone's, I was in the Channel Islands, it was the end of last summer, so I don't know if anyone's been since then. But then again, there was a lot of, it was a pain, but I think it was a lot of COVID stuff. And it was even different between, we landed in Alderney and then we went to Guernsey, and they wouldn't let us into Guernsey because Alderney gave us the wrong colour sticker. We had to have a green sticker, not a blue sticker. And it was like, they wouldn't let us off the marina. And then we had to go back the next morning. And there's a lot of that. But I think that was probably that was COVID, I think, more perhaps than Brexit stuff. But it was, it was kind of difficult for sure.
I would always, any official, always be polite, grit your teeth, have a nice folder with all the ship's papers, always have the right courtesy, and just go with it. Really, there's also customs is a bit of an issue. Sometimes, there's various issues that they might be looking for other things. Just kind of got to go with it, really. But yes, it's not completely simple, but all achievable still.
Just on how busy are the marinas there? Like, a busy weekend in the Solent, and you think you're getting into Yarmouth or something can be a bundle of fun, and getting all the way over there and suddenly going, oh crikey, I've just been sailing for 12 hours and now I'm searching to get in somewhere. Is it difficult, or?
It can vary. So you can arrive in St. Peter Port in Guernsey and just think, yay, we're here. And then you turn the corner in and think, oh my God. And there's like 5 harbour master dinghies. Their boats are 6 abreast. When you get there, you've been put alongside a crew who are getting up in 2 hours to do the next thing. Then you've got to do all this manoeuvring. So it can get very busy. Some places will take bookings. Some of those harbours, especially because the tides are so much more, you need the tide to get in over a sill. So you've got to think about that to get the ones you can book. That's why I think if you can anchor somewhere, I always used to get into Alderney. There's a load of mooring buoys, first come, first serve. They can be very busy. St. Peter Port can be very busy in Guernsey. But once I started just feeling a bit more confident and anchoring, it's just...
What about when you go like Cherbourg and places like that? Or
so Chanteray Marina in Cherbourg's usually got room. It's pretty big. They will fit you in, or they'll raft you up somewhere. There's also, when you get to Chanteray and Cherbourg, there's a little waiting pontoon. So what I've done whenever I've really late, even if there's space, there we go. I just go onto that waiting pontoon and deal with it in the morning because I don't want to scratch someone's boat or mess it up. And even in Cherbourg, just outside you've got the outer breakwater and then the inner breakwater. Just outside there, you can anchor, or outside the heart of the marina. So have a look at the pilot books. There's always a kooky little place you can anchor, even if it's just for a few hours until you go in to the pontoon area, really. There's another app worth mentioning called Navily, Navily, which a lot of people seem to be using, and you can it will show you in different places people's recent experiences and what they've got away with, where you can get water, where you can get ashore, and all this kind of stuff. So I think Mark's just showing that there. So Navily is pretty good. Cool. So like I say, it's not completely exhaustive, but some things to be thinking about and to encourage you, hopefully. The next webinar we're going to do in 3 weeks' time is a bit more like about offshore, and many of the things we've talked about are just as relevant. But I was going to look a bit more on that, on kind of living on board, some more sort of safety, crew overboard recovery, some of those kind of things. As well as sort of bigger picture stuff. So if you're able to join us on that, you'd be very welcome. But unless there's any last thoughts, I think that's us for this evening.
Thank you very much.
You're all coming.
Really useful. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Dara.
Nice to see you all. Nice to see you again.
Cheers, Dara.
Cool. Should we just stay on a second, Mark, at the end?
Yeah, absolutely.
Nice.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.